Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Impact Policy Podcast. My name's Sam Johnson. I'm the Managing Director at Impact Policy, and I'm proud to be joined here by a colleague and friend, Jessie Robinson. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to acknowledge country. We're recording this episode on Bidjigal country here in Sydney City, and I want to take a moment to extend that deepest respects to the countries in which all these listeners and viewers might be engaging with this content from today. I want to recognise that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and that it was never ceded by treaty. Today, I'm privileged to be joined again by Jessie. I'm going to give him a moment to introduce himself, talk a little bit to his story, his journey, how he's got to where he's doing now, and the amazing work that we're doing within and outside of Impact Policy as well, in the world of co-design, engagement, and a range of other things as well. So with that, as well, just for anyone listening and watching along, I might ask you, if you do get something out of this episode, please share it with your networks. Please subscribe to our channels so that we can build the engagement and build the capacity for us to be able to continue to provide these resources and tools for our community as well. So with that, I might hand over to you, Brad. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and a bit about yourself?
We were just reflecting off camera that I actually got connected to you through the podcast a bit over 12 months ago.
Yeah, full circle.
A full circle. So that connection has led to me sort of being introduced to you, and now I'm working with you. So yeah, it's a privilege to be in this space and share with you and share with the listeners a little bit about my journey personally, but also I guess professionally, and sort of pass on any sort of reflections or insights that I've come across in my career, I guess, but also, a lot of lived experience there as well. So, which really has influenced the way that I do my work, and something I'm very proud of, and something that I strive, I guess, to help and elevate and weave lived experience through, most projects, whether is with government, non-government, whatever sort of projects we're working on. So, yeah, it's a little bit about me, but yeah, excited to share.
Absolutely. And so you're a senior consultant at Impact Policy. You do a stack of work, particularly around co-design, engagement and strategy. But before you come to Impact Policy and the consulting world, you spent a significant amount of your career in the not-for-profit and community sector. Do you want to talk to a little bit about what that sort of journey looked like for you in terms of the work you were doing, the reflections or lessons you took away, and any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I spent probably the majority of my career, my adult sort of life, working in the not-for-profit sector for a large NGO, which has given me so many good experiences in terms of the community work that I've done, and it really developed the way that I go about doing things. And I think there was attributes of that meant that I had to really learn innovative and creative ways of doing work because of the sort of the community projects that I did work on. But I guess at the start of that, I started out like most blackfellas probably. I was a young person myself. I decided to step into that world because I felt like I had strengths where I could. I think like most people, they want to connect with other young people and help them along on their journey, because they probably reflect on some of the supports that they had in their own lives, and they feel like they could add that to some young people that aren't as privileged to have those supports with them. So I really, when I first kicked off, I started doing the operations. So I was doing a lot of youth work, and I moved into sort of more child protection, family support work, early intervention, and moved into management eventually, which I really enjoyed, and it's really shaped the way that I do my work. I guess the concept of engagement struck me from that start in how do I sort of create accessibility for people that really have complex lives where things are really difficult for them. And for me, how do I sort of acknowledge my privilege and allow them to sort of come to me at their time of need, I guess. So early on, I was always switched on and really thinking, how do I sort of do my best work as a practitioner in my own way? So that really grew. And then, I spent the last few years of my career doing a lot of things, or the last few years, I guess, doing things around strategy and advocacy and those sorts of roles, which have really probably helped me to grow my voice,
Yeah.
and allow me to speak to issues that are relating back to, our systems and structures that are holding us back, especially as First Nations people. So it's all led me, I guess, to this point in my career where, I feel like I've got a fair bit of experience in the engagement space, and I've the last 4 or 5 years I've learned a lot about co-design as well. So that's really honed my skills, and I guess based off a lot of curiosity, and just having a growth mindset professionally, it's probably gotten me to a space where probably, I'm no expert, but I feel like I know, a little bit more than average. So
Yeah, absolutely.
just trying to pass on that knowledge. And I guess one of the most important aspects of that was I acknowledged that, co-design and engagement was ultimately just a small piece of the puzzle that was going to allow my people a voice, a say, agency in decisions over their own lives. So
Definitely.
that was, just a lead towards self-determination. So I just wanted to make sure that I, developed my skills in that space, and that's what I've done. And I'm so lucky that I work in it full time with impact policy.
Yeah, mad. It's like not sort of uncommon or unsurprising to sort of hear that trajectory coming into that not-for-profit sector and your journey and experience that's got you from frontline youth work and engagement, like a lot of us when we enter in to that sort of sector, to where you sort of were towards that end of that sort of journey in terms of the systems work you were sort of navigating strategically and looking at co-design as well. And I think it's all really, weaved organically in a lot of ways in terms of your lived experience and professional experience. And you've touched on some of that culturally as well. But yesterday you shared a really nice, for anyone listening, yesterday Jessie, myself and Sean, where we facilitated a co-design workshop for the Bullabul Indigenous Leadership Program that was ran here on Gadigal country. But you shared a story at the start of that about your experience with your mum as a young person and her connection as a carer. And if you're comfortable, could you share with people listening about that sort of stuff? Because when you talk about the work that you did in the not-for-profit sector, particularly with those communities and young people with that lived experience, I think it's a nice part of that puzzle, and how that maybe has informed, or some of those values have informed how you navigate and do what you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. For me, so, I grew up on country out in Peak Hill in Western New South Wales, which for those who might not know is a very small, I like to describe as an Aboriginal community, because, a lot of my family come from that town or spend a lot of time in that town. And that gave me the ability to, there's some really great parts of that, and there were some really sort of sad parts of that, but it really shaped who I was as a person. In that community, there's a lot of disadvantage. It's quite isolated, so it's about 70 odd kilometres from Dubbo. It doesn't seem much, but for a small town, it doesn't have a lot of supports in terms of, programs and things that might enter the town. So a lot of people sort of really get isolated there. And I guess quite early on, I learned a lot about how the systems were against us, especially as blackfellas. So, I grew up in, I think now that I reflect on it, I had a really good experience in terms of understanding what Aboriginal kinship systems were like. So my dad, he's got a lot of siblings, and they've got a lot of children themselves, and they've got children. So I've got a lot of cousins that are still very much connected to town. So my parents still live there. My siblings are still there in Peak Hill. So it really shaped who I was as a person, unintentionally, but I think it was such a perfect experience for me, and it's built on me as a person. But when I reflect on my parents, I shared yesterday that so my father, an Aboriginal man who's so proud and staunch, had a really tough life in terms of experiencing racism, discrimination in a small community. And I really lived on those stories. So he would tell me a lot about his time, in the 70s, 80s, living in Canberra, marching with the Aboriginal Tent Embassy and those sorts of yarns. So
wow.
he really gave me a really good sort of understanding and snapshot of, blackfellas fight for what they want, never back down and be yourself. So really take that from him. We would often, I would be a small child and still be talking about, things that were affecting us. So we had that really good connection at that point. And then my mum is such a beautiful person. So she when they were together, now separated, but back before actually I was around, early 20s, I think, my dad was working for the Department of Community Services at that stage, and he would spend a lot of time in small Aboriginal communities sort of surrounding Peak Hill and Western New South Wales. And he would see, obviously, some really sad sort of stories. And that would mean he would come home and obviously debrief with mum and talk about some of the sad things that were happening to these families. And my mum, from her own lived experience of, losing her parents early, and her brother spent time in homes and things like that. So what that did is, it really, I think, ticked her, and she felt, this sense of compassion that, there's a lot of children out there that are really struggling, and with her own lived experience allowed her to go, I can give these children a really loving home. I've got space in my house. So she eventually, went through her checks and become a foster carer in her early 20s. So
She was in her early 20s.
In her early 20s. So she's been caring for, I would say, close to 50 years.
Yeah, wow. Wow.
She still does it now to this day.
Yeah.
So I've got a young brother that is living with her. And she says, she talks about, she's been saying she's probably had about 200 children come through the home over those years. But I think she's been saying that for about 10 or 15 years. So there's probably a little bit more, but
underestimating big time,
I sort of reflected on that. That gave me a really unique experience, I think. I won't go too far into it, but just sort of understanding and working with young people that, have got care backgrounds, that really gave me that sense of confidence to step into community services. And just probably my unique engagement skills also developed very early on, because it wasn't so uncommon for me to come home from school on a Friday afternoon and there was 2 extra kids at the dinner table with, extra food on the table for them. So I quickly learnt how to yarn to young people. I'm sure that's made me a better practitioner.
Absolutely. What would you say for someone listening, if they maybe they're a practitioner, maybe they want to work in in this sort of sector with young people? What advice would you have for someone that might be working with a young person from a care background, or a young person that has experienced trauma or complex needs? What would your general advice sort of be for those people?
I think for me, a lot of it starts from deep listening. I think, and there's, I really say deep listening because I think there's a difference between deep listening and listening. In terms of deep listening, I touch on, and I've spoke about this before, but I really believe that, it's human nature for us to really want to, especially when we, see a really sad story, or, a young person that's had a really tough life. We really want to create outcomes for them or help them in some sort of way when we're, generally caring people. That's human nature. But I think what that does is it launches us into this sort of mode of let's try and solve the problem for them. But I think if we strip it right back and we start to build a really genuine relationship with someone, we'll learn organically about them, and we'll work at a pace that suits that young person. So I think if you consider deep listening, for me that means really sitting, listening, and taking on board exactly what they're saying and allowing them to sort of share at their own pace. I think from that, the relationship can only grow. And it also, it may not finish that way either. They might decide that, you're not the right person to open up to, but you really give an agency to that young person.
Absolutely. I think that relationships message there, I think, is really critical for a lot of workers to take away, or students, professionals, whoever you are listening along. Like that. It starts with deep listening, but before you can even really start to have a connection or an impact on a young person you might be working with, you've got to build a relationship of some sorts. it makes me reflect. I was in a community centre yesterday, and there's a young fella there, some young fellas there that are struggling, similar those sorts of backgrounds, and I was debriefing with some of the workers, and they were talking about one of them, really trying to take a hard line with this young person's behaviour, and that young person just, not hearing any of it. And it was really the conversation we were having when we were debriefing was, well, you can't have a hard yarn with a young person if you haven't got a relationship with them. If there's not a level of trust and respect at some level between you both, you can't have a hard yarn with someone about their behaviour, because it will go in one ear and out the other, because they're often in survival mode, or they're in flight, and they don't have the capacity to sit there and hear what's happening. They're just hearing another person that's hammering them, and stuff like that. But I think you're right, like that relationships piece is massive, and it starts with listening. So hopefully anyone listening along, can take some of those key messages away as practitioners too. So what a journey, eh? So
it's been a journey.
Yeah, bruh. And what a really special like connection to where you are at now, in terms of being able to really live and you have a lived experience of that sort of world, by growing up around it and seeing it from day to day, 250 siblings, at a minimum, like across that sphere. But then to be now doing the sort of stuff that we're doing at Impact Policy, where some of the work that we are doing is quite systemic and transformational in terms of the impact that we're trying to have. How do you then start to think about how do we bring some of those lessons and those journeys into how we do our work now at that more structural level?
Such a great question. I think about this often, and it's probably early on in my career, when I was working in operations, and I was, I've done casework for a long time. And it's I say it with respect, but I know, a lot of caseworkers, majority of caseworkers are really trying their hardest to do great things. But I often used to question the outcomes, because the systems used to hold back, the really brilliantly sort of designed engagement that should be happening, and how that might create better outcomes for young people. But I often used to look at the systems holding them back and go, there's more to this. And it used to sort of irked me a little bit, and that, I guess, what drove me to sort of move into the space that I'm in now. But I often questioned, there's things that are holding us back, and we need to fix that. So that's when I started to just sort of lean into advocacy and really sort of trying to extract what policy is out there, what is happening in terms of our design. And I truly believed in our people that we had the ability to really have a say in and create community-led outcomes.
With the co-design sort of journey that you've been on, and got to give K.A. McKercher a shout out, because she's been a big part of both of our journeys into the co-design world. And they've been pivotal with their support and mentoring and guidance along the way. And you use that even yesterday when we were doing the training, but you've talked to it a lot as well. And I've heard KA say it too, that concept of like co-design is not a new thing. And Mob have been, co-designing for, 60,000 plus years before we started to put this method, around how we understand it. But for you, in terms of how you sort of lent into this journey, both personally, professionally, but also culturally too, what's that sort of piece been like? Because I know that I've particularly talked to you about like, it's only really this year that I've started to see myself as a designer. And, maybe there's a cultural element of some of the friction with that feeling comfortable or not. But, when we reflect on the work that you and me are working on, we're very much working as designers, in human-centered and system-centered design. So just like thinking about your journey in that sort of respect, can you talk to some of that sort of stuff from a cultural lens too?
I love that. From a cultural point of view, I probably touched on it a little bit earlier, but speaking about, there was a level of accountability that I seen in co-design. So that helped me to really understand that, if we give accountability across, government, bureaucrats, whoever it might be, that are sort of funding these projects, and allow us as blackfellas in community to have a say, it can only be, a more respectable process. So from a cultural point of view, I've seen it fitted that. And, in my career, I know it's really been around for probably 30, 40 years, I think, back to the 70s, where co-design was sort of a Western process. But it's really obviously shot off in the last, few years, specifically in government, where they've decided that this is a way forward. It's almost become trendy in a little bit. It's kind of really risky that the way that they're talking about it, because it may not be delivered in the right way. But
yeah, I love how Shawnee likes to refer to it as a PR stunt.
It is definitely, and it feels like it's almost given it a sense that it's a magic bullet and it's going to go out and solve everything. But realistically, it's just a tool that can be utilised to work with community in a really sort of nice, collaborative, respectful way.
Yeah.
But also, I must admit, my practices obviously been, I think, really the foundations of it come from our old people. They have built, the knowledge in me to understand what building respectful relationships, understanding what collaboration really looks like. To me, that is an old cultural practice anyways.
Absolutely.
I think about for 60,000 years, we would have sat around in a circle and yarned about things. We would have designed and innovated, from the first sunrise. Otherwise, together. I just sort of pay respects to KA as well as a mentor for me, who's been hugely important. I first come across KA probably about 18 months ago.
Yeah.
I was sort of introduced through a mutual friend, and KA is really, they've spent a lot of time with me and helped to sort of develop and hone my skills, but in a really sort of a culturally appropriate way, and allowed me to sort of spread my wings and lean off a lot of what they've developed.
Absolutely.
And they've done some amazing work, and I appreciate KA so much, and they've really shaped the way that I do my work. And I know I've got so much more to learn, but I'm around, really good people that are helping me on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. They've been the biggest ally and supporter for us personally and our journey to impact policy, and not just that, but they delivering amazing services in the co-design world too. I've been a part of their training. I know you have as well. And even on the online space, like in a world where we're getting online fatigue, like I actually find their training was really, really engaging, which I was absolutely surprised about. I was like, oh, an online training, here we go.
Yep.
I was like, oh wow, this is really good, and I'm not like dozing off or anything, in that virtual world, which is, it's a bit uncommon, when we're spending so much of our time in front of a screen. So yeah, couldn't acknowledge and echo what you're saying, bro, in terms of thanks, but also recognition too.
Yeah.
The path that they're blazing. Yeah. So we spent a big day yesterday, doing deep dive sort of co-design work together. Just coming off the back of that, do you have any big reflections that you've thought? I know we've talked a little bit between you, me and Sean, but it was a big day. We had staff there from, people listening, like Australian public service leaders, as part of a leadership program. So we had about 40 people in the room, all across different parts of the public sector, all talking, deep into co-design. But for you, any sort of key things that jumped out that you think people might, want to hear?
I think there's two things that really stand out for me. One that's really positive, and one that I'm really sort of pondering and going, how do we go about trying to sort of help, influence that space, because we want to see change overall for, marginalised people, essentially. The real positive is I've seen a real change in the baseline knowledge around co-design.
Yeah,
so I really feel like the last couple of years, even though we're seeing a lot of the risk around people, essentially saying they're doing co-design, but they're not, and it's a real risk to community because of the the over consultation, the danger in sort of perpetrating more harm on those people that we really need to be careful around. But I guess the real risk too that I'm seeing, and it sort of has developed over a little bit of time, but the hunch around, leadership is such a key component to delivering efficient and effective co-design.
Yes.
So I'm really seeing this sort of notion that co-design has really been the process itself is being shut down through leadership who really want to finalize things quickly and have pressure from top down, which is really dangerous. So we sort of spoke yesterday a lot about the sort of outcomes versus outputs, and understanding that outputs and just pumping out things really quickly is not always the best way.
Yeah.
And especially in a collaborative sort of process like co-design, sometimes we've got to take the time and slow down. But essentially, I think why it's so powerful for blackfellas is we're creating, if we get it right, long-term sustainable change, and we won't have to go back to keep reviewing this stuff all the time. If we take the time a little bit longer, do it the right ways, build the relationships the right ways, allow that deep listening to happen, bring all the knowledge together and allow it to create something that is powerful, that has the ability to change generations.
Absolutely.
Whereas it's probably more of a blackfella, way of being and doing. Whereas I don't know if the Western world has really caught up to that yet. We're so concentrated on outputs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it, right? Like we really need leadership to be championing this sort of shift in mindset for co-design if we really want to see that impact for the long term. I think you're right. We get to, it was evident yesterday, we could see some people there that really championed co-design that were in that room, but really talked to the barriers and, red tape or gates that were in the way to be able to progress that sort of stuff. But I think you're right. Like if we can embed these processes and do this work well, it's setting us up for success across not just what we've built together, but how that relationship continues to impact everything we do moving forward. I think that's why that first phase that we talk about with our work, around before we even start design, and we're investing in communication, engagement, and listening, like that sort of stuff is it's woven through that piece of work and whatever else will come, because you're really setting a strong foundation. And I think, it's a real sort of leadership piece, and I'm doubling with it too in terms of, where do we sort of sit in terms of how we can add the most value for leaders? How can we really, empower leaders to have the courage to, push back or champion this sort of ways of working, when, there might be external pressures along, getting stuff out for ministers or within certain timelines. But, we've worked flexibly around some of the stuff that we're trying to do in some projects where, premiers have come in and said, it's got to be co-designed ASAP. And, we've pushed back against that, and we've had support from teams that have listened to that. And we've been able to get some flexibility within that. But I think you're right. I think that's where the sticking point is for us is, and it's not just specific to co-design, like that output versus outcomes sort of piece is, transferable across how we talk about social policy and engagement broadly, even just outside of thinking about co-design. I think, I think for me, the biggest thing that came out for me, and this has been my own journey as well, but particularly yesterday too, was when we have the infographic that you put into the presentation around the spectrum of engagement. And I think for that was really valuable for a lot of people. So, for people listening, like we'll have a link in the show notes, but, there's different stages that starts with the different levels of power. And, the lowest end of that spectrum is coercion, and the highest is it co-creation? Co-production at the top end. And, you got engagement, you got education, consultation, co-design, they're all in there. But one of the things that I think we need to come back to as well is that, like, it's almost like co-design is being used as that, PR reference or stock standard for everything. I feel like that's becoming more prominent because it's almost like a default for the public sector to recognise that consultation isn't done well. So now everything is just called co-design because of a recognition that we don't do consultation well. Whereas, like, what we could see yesterday in that room was there was some projects that probably didn't need to be they don't have the conditions for co-design to be the way, for the method for working. And what it probably actually just really needs is a really great consultation strategy that provides community with a chance to have their voice heard. And that's okay for those conditions and for that project, or, whatever else might be appropriate on that spectrum. And so I think there's a real sort of, we're talking about co-design specifically, but there's also a real piece there around how do we actually do, we talk about consultation fatigue, and all this sort of stuff in our communities. How do we also really champion really strong and effective engagement and consultation as well as part of that process? That was a big thing for me, I think, and not forgetting that they all are critical pieces of the puzzle and all have their important place as part of this sort of stuff. So
it's such an important reflection, and I feel like there's a real risk at the moment that government is just seeing co-design as a real linear process, and that's the end of the journey. Whereas I think the whole co-production journey, the spectrum of it, there's so much more that needs to go on before it and after it to make it successful. We can't just do something physically and then fix the issue and move away from it. There's a real risk in that, I think. So understanding that, building the conditions at the start, co-design potentially if it's the right conditions, but also what you do after it, the aftercare is really important. So there's so much that goes into it. And unless you're doing that, essentially I think there's a risk that it'll break down again and it'll cause more harm. You'll have to come back and do the same thing, a couple of years later or whatever it might be. And I also think, that there's probably the other thing that stands out for me is there's a lot of talk about co-design, which might be, for a lot of government departments, I feel like just collaborating really well with other departments, which is essentially, one of the key ingredients of co-design is elevating lived experience and living experience and weaving their voice into the process. Because if that doesn't happen, essentially we're not capturing the voice of the people that are going to be using that service or program or whatever it might be that we're designing. The way I look at it is, we've collaborated amongst departments, sometimes really well, sometimes not so well, but we've really worked together at that level for a long time, and we haven't achieved what we have wanted to achieve. We're really struggling in certain areas, but
definitely,
if we allow and do something a little bit different, which is, a weird sort of analogy, but because we've done it, previously before colonisation really well, but after colonisation we've sort of, we've repressed the people that we really should be yarning with, and that has caused this issue where, we haven't got the user sort of speaking into the design of whatever they might be using. So, collaboration is not just working amongst, departments or whatever it might be. It has to be elevating lived experience and living experience throughout that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a critical point that you touch on, that lived and living experience. And it makes me reflect on the example yesterday around there was a participant in the room that talked about, I talked about the challenges of doing co-design at a national level, and they had an example of where they really felt like they are doing it quite well, and we had a yarn about that and unpack that sort of stuff. But that's the reality of the complexity, right? Like if you are trying to design, a funding program or whatever it might be, at a national scale, how do you elevate and centre the voices of lived and living experience? Because that is, if we're going to call it co-design, that is a key part of that process, right? It's it's similar like at a local level with some of the work that we're doing in regional New South Wales. There's so many different stakeholders that are involved and connected to what we're doing, but really the essence of what we're most passionate about is centering the voices of the people that are likely going to be accessing or using that service. And it doesn't mean that really great consultation and engagement doesn't need to happen with all those other stakeholders. But what we're designing and building, we want to be doing alongside the people that are actually going to be, engaging with these services and these places. So I think it's a critical point that you touch on for people listening. Like if you're using this language around co-design, and you're taking that sort of method to where you're working, then that's got to be the center of it. You know, where are the voices? Where are the people that are informing how we build this together? And if we don't have that yet, how do we get there?
So important. And I guess what I'm most proud of about working in impact policy is, being an Aboriginal owned and led agency. We live, we work, we raise our families on in communities. So we essentially understand cultural integrity, and we know that through this process we're accountable to our people first.
Yeah.
So we always talk about any sort of process, whatever happens with community, has to happen from genuine relationships first. So I'm really proud that we sort of center that first, and then allow for whatever process to happen organically if it's the right way to go about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's a good point that you talking up how good impact policy is. So yeah, keep going there, brother. Nice. But I think what I'm trying to say is what you're talking to though is something that I think we do really well, is that we often get people come to us saying, we got this project, we want to co-design it. But stuff that we've just talked about that people are listening to is that there is a really important piece before we even start talking about co-design, and it's about engagement, and it's about understanding if the conditions are right and if it's appropriate for that to be the journey. And I think we talked about it yesterday in the workshop. It's like, how often do we make a decision we're going to co-design something before we even engage with any of these people that we're talking about, working alongside and doing things with. And I think that there's some great examples of different pieces of work that we've been on. But I think a really good example of, we work largely with the public sector, but a really good reflection of teams that we work with that really have a strong mindset for co-design are really receptive to hearing that, and hearing that, we'll often come back and go like, hey, like, we champion co-design and we do it really well. But to get there, there's actually a piece of work here that probably needs to happen for us really to assess and test if this is feasible. And it doesn't mean we can't achieve outcomes and progress towards where you want to get to. But that'll help us understand what we're talking about when we talk about co-design. We talk about the breadth and the depth, and I think it was like we really try and, I know you're doing a lot of facilitation stuff with Sean. Like, we try and at Impact Policy peel everything back in terms of how we think about co-design, all the way back to the inception and planning. And so, like, I asked the group yesterday, I was like, what's the first thing you do when you get an instruction, to do something within government? You generally write a brief and a project plan. But, we are talking about, well, if you're going to write a project plan around co-design, you should be co-designing that project plan, because in that you're talking about timelines, you're talking about stakeholders, you're talking about, methods of communication and engagement. And if you're talking about that through the lens of co-design, but you haven't spoke to anyone about how you're co-creating that, how often have we found as well as being brought into support projects where internally a team's built a project plan around co-design, and we get in and the first thing community says is like, this is moving too quick. Slow down. And then there's friction because we talk about we need to like peel it right back as early as we can, and it comes back again to that critical phase at the start around communications, engagement and connection, Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the really key components of co-design, as you say there, is, you have to work together with community from the start and allow them some decision-making and power to choose what they want and don't want to do.
Yeah.
And, essentially that means we can't make decisions too quickly, too early without them involved. Otherwise, we're just really seeking feedback or consulting really quickly, which is not a true co-design process.
What's some of the, I guess maybe some of the challenges or some of the advice that you could give to people listening, just in your experience in co-design, whether it's an impact policy or not, in terms of maybe like where there has been friction either in community or with, clients or project teams, and around how we can navigate that sort of stuff in the world of co-design,
I I'm really passionate about if it's, we're talking about co-design in Aboriginal communities,
Yep.
that it has to be led by Aboriginal people. Essentially, if we're stepping away from that as a principle, then we're not doing the right thing by community. And for a couple of reasons, but I'd say the main one is, the real skill set behind engaging Aboriginal communities is, it can be complex and difficult, and ultimately, our communities have been let down for too long from government. They've been over-consulted, and there's so many broken promises throughout our communities, but also, at a larger scale, that has made, engagement really difficult. So I think that considering that it's Aboriginal-led is one of the really key parts of it. So I would say, if there's people out there listening that are thinking about going through a co-design process, I would strongly encourage them to consider, having a co-lead or someone that's going to drive that engagement process and really understand it. But also, I think there's not that many people out there, I don't think, especially in, trying to consider co-design in Aboriginal communities that are really doing a really great job of it. So there's some amazing things happening, but doing true co-design, I think it needs to be considered and really approach the right people to get it done. So there's so many amazing things happening in community. There's so many people out there, and it's almost, we talk about, learning a new process like co-design is something that can be learned, especially amongst, really clever people from government or whatever it might be. But understanding the real nuances of engaging with blackfellas is difficult, and it can't be learnt through a textbook. So understanding that is something that, being around the right people, allowing them agency and to have the right conversations and build the right relationships is where you'll start to see that, the better outcomes and have the really deep conversations that allows you to build the conditions to even consider a process like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what resonated with me when you were talking about that and being community-led is that sometimes it, and I heard this again yesterday in the workshop, was that sometimes I feel like really great co-design is there's a real blur between it actually just being community-led. And it touches on exactly how you opened that yarn with, I feel like because there is such a power imbalance between government and community, I feel like the more power, the more agency that we give to community to drive it, to drive solutions in community or to design, together in community, the more we let our communities lead those journeys and we come along on that with them, the more we can do more co-design stronger together. And so I feel like when I've seen it done the best, it's actually felt more like it's just been community-led. And we've just come along on the journey, because we've got, we have the resources and the budget and the infrastructure to support what we're trying to build together, and maybe some expertise technically or whatever as part of that. But really, it's been our communities driving the car, and, we just sit in the back seat, chipping in for petrol along the way.
100%.
Yeah, hiding in the boot.
And I think true co-design, really what it boils down to is, everyone has a role to play. So essentially we're moving away from the Western-centric hierarchical way of doing things where, a leader is making all the decisions, someone underneath them is then listening and sort of spreading that message across the team. We're moving away from that thinking, but it doesn't mean that leadership or, facilitation doesn't exist in that space. It just means everyone plays their role and understands exactly what they're there for. So, I really think about it, the old analogy of blackfellas sitting in a circle, and doesn't mean we wouldn't have someone there, an elder, driving that conversation, allowing, the really deep yarns and insights to come out from the people that matter most. But we all know our roles, and we communicate, really well. We're transparent in that process. And we know, that mix of voices is going to come up with a better outcome than, just one person making decisions and allowing that to sort of filter down and other people be told how to do things.
Absolutely. I think one thing that sort of sits in the back of my head when you're talking about that sort of stuff as well, for people listening is like one of the frictions I'm feeling is staff that and people that really, they're supportive of co-design, they get it, and there's this real pressure from the two worlds that they're working in, right? Like the internal pressure around being outputs focused, as opposed to, really understanding the outcome that we're working towards, but really struggling to compromise with some of those internal pressures around, outputs, quick timelines and quick responses and, to continue to progress forward. And I think one of the conversations that we're constantly sort of trying to have is around a big part of co-design being flexible. And, and there is, we talk about being in the grey and, not that you need to be able to sit in not having all the answers all the time in different parts of that journey. And that's okay. It's a part of it. But that's a real challenge, right, in the public sector when everything is spelled out, every step, every tick, every dot,
Yep.
And, we've had a lot of, really sort of careful conversations around, talking to our people and going like, hey, you wanted to do this in 4 weeks, but communities say that like it's going to be 8. But that's not a bad thing. Like, you feel sorry for people we work with sometimes because you can see the pressure, that they're holding that almost. And it's like, nah, it's actually like if we can pivot and listen and adapt to what we're hearing in community, it might take a couple extra weeks. It might not be the initial timeline that we identified, but what that's going to mean for us in terms of the relationship we're building, the outcomes we're working towards, all that other sort of stuff as well is really, really valuable. But it's something that, we've experienced at many different times across different projects where we're trying to come back and communicate back what community's telling us as part of this co-design journey that we're on. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do you have any advice for practitioners that might be listening? They're super passionate about doing this sort of stuff, but maybe there's a bit of friction with that. How can they manage and navigate and maybe deal with some of that sort of stuff?
That's such a great question. And I think what resonates with me or what sticks out to me is thinking about how do we approach this in a really trauma-informed way? So when I consider, my engagement with people, I always, thinking about that power imbalance, I sit in privilege, allowing me to sit with them in conversation, but allowing that space in between interactions is a much more trauma-informed way of working. So we're allowing people to reflect on whatever's occurred. Say I sit down with someone and have a conversation, whether it's an elder or a young person, I want to give them time to process that interaction. So often we see, I think, within government, they're pushing timeframes where they want to just achieve something through 1 or 2 workshops. And that, it can work, but if we're trying to do a really true co-design process, we've got to allow, at the start to build the conditions so that relationship to the point where we can have really deep conversations and dive into some really challenging things for these people. But we've also got to remember, it's not just an extraction process. We're not just trying to get, extract, insights out of them that it could be truly, really confronting for them to talk about.
Yes,
and helping
absolutely.
them, we've got to remember that we're working with people that experience some really challenging things in their lives, and we're asking them questions that could really, cause discomfort for them. So taking, working with care is so important for us at Impact Policy, and understanding that we're talking to people that are real people, have real lives, and have real struggles that are not their fault. Things have happened to them that have, put them in this position, and I think it really leans back to understanding that colonisation has caused a lot of this effect on them. So we sit with them with respect. And I think my advice to practitioners would be, there's so much trauma-informed training out there, and I think people are doing it in ways, but also I think just really diving deeper in trauma-informed ways and how we interact with people specifically would be, just a really more insightful and productive way to work with people and understand, we're really dealing with people that have complex behaviours because of other things that have happened in their lives.
Yeah. I think that's a really great call to action and something for people to take away about that trauma-informed learning, training, and ways of working. And I think you're right. Like, it's a thread across so much of what we're doing in terms of the engagement across our communities that are experiencing complex needs. And we know that pick justice for an example, much of what, mechanisms and responses that exist within youth justice aren't trauma-informed or have been designed, like I'll use the Young Offenders Act, and Youth Justice Conferencing as an example. Like, it's been around for 20 plus years as a diversionary method for young people, long before we even started talking about trauma-informed, the impact of trauma on, offending and the youth justice system. And I think that impact resonates across, experiences in health, education, and a range of other settings as well that you touched on there too, Bra. So I think absolutely for people listening along to start to really understand not just how that can inform your own engagement, but also how it informs your own understanding of some of the most complex social policy challenges we're trying to navigate today. Much of that is really intertwined with the ongoing impacts of colonisation, intergenerational trauma, and complex social disadvantage. So yeah, I think, outside of even just informing your general engagement, I think that's something really valuable for people to take away. So thinking about where we're at, where we've got to, we've got some really exciting stuff that we're working on 2025. If you're listening to this, we're coming into Christmas 2024. We're doing some big pieces in the co-design world in the new year. But I just wanted to maybe also have a bit of a yarn. We're so lucky to have you, Bra, here at Impact Policy. I'm so proud of the team that we have. I'm so proud of the diversity of skills and experiences that we all bring as a really staunch and strong team. And outside of Impact Policy, you also lead your own stuff as well. I want to talk to that too, because I think it's really valuable to support and champion some of the great stuff that you're doing as well, personally and professionally. And so I'd really love to, hear a little bit about your own sort of stuff that you're driving. I think people would love to hear that. I know you connect and resonate with a lot of people. And I think it might be nice for people that are listening to this, that, if they're working across, major sort of, programs and systems, and they want to have a yarn to Impact Policy about some of that sort of stuff, that's great. But there also might be some specific pieces that people might just want to have a yarn to you about as well, in terms of some of the great stuff you're doing. So maybe just talk to us a little bit about, some of that journey for you, brother.
Thanks, Bra. Excitingly, I do my own consulting on the side. So I've got Mawang Consulting. What that means, Mawang is a Wiradjuri word for all together, which I think really summarises what it's all about for me. Is if we sit with community, if we're doing things all together, in a united front, we're going to get better outcomes. So
absolutely,
it really leans into that collaboration, co-design sort of concepts that, I'm not an expert. I'm someone that I'm passionate about engaging with community, and I just want to give, communities a voice in coming up with solutions for themselves, because I truly understand and I'm passionate about they are experts of their own lives. And if I sit and listen, and if I foster that environment and allow them that opportunity, then I can only pick up that information, hopefully translate it in some way, and send it back to government or whoever the client might be, and help them along on their journey. I think that's my greatest strength and attribute. So that's the biggest driver. I would say too, I guess, moving into my own consulting away from the not-for-profit sector was ultimately about self-determination for myself.
Yeah, I love that.
So I was really keen on, leaning into projects that, stood, really highly with me, that were, really giving me, I had the passion to do something about. Not that I had a really great experiences in a not-for-profit sector, but ultimately I think if I'm out here preaching that, self-determination is so important for my people. I think I want to role model that too. I've got a young family.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that I'm doing that and showing, I've got a young son that is learning a lot more about the work that I do.
Yep.
And I'm so proud to go home and have conversations with him about, things that are so important to me. But he truly understands too that, I'm now basically working with impact policy, doing stuff with Marwan Consulting. He can see that I'm really driving or attempting to drive change for my people. And it's really important for me that I role model that as a dad and he sees that impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I want him to grow up and see, there's a different way and he can achieve, things that he wants in life. So, they're my biggest driving factors. And I think ultimately, if we continue to do that stuff on an individual level or, within our families, we're going to create change overall. And, essentially that's what I'm here for. It's not work to me. It's a way of life.
Yeah.
I seriously would probably do this without pay, but
don't say that.
Don't tell that. I truly love what I do. I feel like ultimately these are the strengths that were given to me, and I'm just playing my part in my communities to do whatever I can to support them.
100%. Look, I know that you've done amazing stuff with us in this sort of space, but I know through Marwan you've been particularly doing a lot of stuff in the training sort of space around co-design and stuff like that as well. Is there any sort of specific stuff that if someone was listening and they were like, really resonating with how you talk about a lot of this sort of stuff, is there specific things, you would encourage people to reach out to yarn with you about more?
Yep.
Is it more than just co-design? What's the sort of stuff that you happy to yarn to people about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really big on, I guess I don't have a really sort of strict area of what I'm trying to do, but essentially I want to work with people that want to explore the concept of collaboration, co-design, engagement, strategy, things like that. So people can reach out to me, on LinkedIn. I've also got my own website, marwanconsulting.com. So people can go out there, check out that stuff. And I'm so happy to, I've got a lot of people that reach out to me, via LinkedIn messages where, just have conversations. And I love that it happens quite organically and people probably try and share on LinkedIn quite a lot because I want people to connect with me first and foremost and understand that, if we are to work together, that they are seeing the real, true, authentic, Jessie in the first place. And I'm really, I laugh at it a little bit, but, when I work with someone, I often say we because I really feel truly connected to the projects that I work on. And if that doesn't happen, I know I'm in the wrong places. But essentially, I'm doing the right work because I feel so connected to it. I think back to last week, I was doing a workshop on Gadigal country, and I texted you straight away after, and I said, "Brah, this is the most amazing thing," and it really resonated with me. And it essentially, I turn up to things like that, and I know I'm in the right place, doing the right work.
100%. Well, I know firsthand. I've had feedback from people that have been through training that you've delivered within and outside impact policy as well. So I can, hand on heart plug that independent of impact, that if there's people listening along that really think that they could use some, specific coaching or training or, sort of work in that sort of space in terms of that co-design, collaboration, strategy and engagement world, that, would 100%, encourage you to follow Jessie, engage with Jessie, follow the work of Marwan as well, and connect if you need to have a yarn about that sort of stuff. Because I think hopefully everyone can see from our yarn today the, not just the depth of practice, knowledge and expertise, but also the values and the connection to that work and how that sort of threads through everything as well. So, brother, I want to say thank you so much. Full circle moment, absolutely. I think the first time I heard from you actually was KA was running some training and she said, "Hey, your podcast is having a real big impact on people. I'm at this training, someone's raving about it." And it was in Dubbo, it was somewhere, and I was like, "Oh, who's this?" And she said your name. I hadn't heard, never met you, I'd never heard from you before. And I was like, "Oh yeah," and I just shrugged my shoulders. That's nice, And that was like, over a year ago, you know, and then over that journey we've got more and more connected, and then just to be able to see the impact that we're having as an agency alongside our communities, you know, that you're really leading on the ground alongside Sean and Kakaya and other parts of our team as well, is just nothing short of inspiring, you know. And I think, you know, I will always 100% support, you know, wherever you go and whatever you do, and I'm your biggest champion and supporter, brother. And but don't say you work for free, because I won't keep you much longer. Nah, so proud to have you, bro, and I learn from you every day. And yeah, I look forward to getting you back on the podcast as well, you know, continuing to reflect and dive deep around this co-design stuff, but not just that, the range of other stuff that we sort of do as well. And before we wrap, is there any sort of final thoughts or messages that you might want to leave for anyone that's listening along?
I don't think so, but I just want to say thank you, my brother. Yeah, full circle moment. You know, I come across you, whatever it was, over 12 months ago on the podcast, and, you know, it's resonated with me, and I love to see blackfellas doing well. Ultimately, that's what I'm here for. You know, I want to see our communities thriving. So to share space with you, have a yarn, you know, it feels amazing. I feel privileged that I'm sharing space with you, but also just, you know, I'm working with you, you know, every day, and I learn from you as well. So I so appreciate, you know, our connection, our yarns. You know, we're colleagues, but also our friendship as well. So thanks, my bro.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Cheers.